Born in 1969, he eventually became known as the Godfather of the United Blood Nation, a name that rang out across the East Coast whenever gang violence was mentioned. But before he was feared, before he built an empire inside prison walls and out on the streets, he was something very different, an informant.
He created an empire, the United Blood Nation.
Mack started out in the streets early. By 17, he was already caught up in robbery cases. In August 1987, his life took a big turn when he became the key witness in a Bronx murder case. He told prosecutors that he saw a man named Don Taylor kill Terrence Joyner, but the truth was he was facing heavy charges himself, and this was his way out. At that time, Mack was staring at a 16 to 50-year prison sentence for robbery. His testimony got him a deal, a reduced 2 to 6 years behind bars. On top of that, prosecutors even arranged a conjugal visit with his girlfriend as a sweetener. That deal cost Don Taylor his life. On April 25, 1989, Taylor was convicted purely off Mack's word and sentenced to 22.5 years to life. What nobody knew at the time was that Taylor was innocent. While Taylor sat in prison rotting, the young man who lied on him was busy building his own criminal empire. Fast forward to 1993. Port was sitting in Rikers Island on a weapons charge. This was where he linked up with Leonard OG Deadeye McKenzie, and together they laid the foundation for the United Blood Nation. The original idea was to bring together African American inmates who were constantly under pressure from rival gangs like the Latin Kings, who were dominant in the prison system. Rikers became their training ground.
OG Mack saw African Americans as victimized in prison, especially in relation to Latin gangs. Latin gangs controlled significant parts of the prison.
Mack wasted no time establishing control. One of his first moves was seizing the phone banks in Rikers. Basically, if you wanted to use the phones, you had to pay the Bloods. That meant he controlled the prisoners' lifeline to the outside world. Then came the violence. He introduced the now infamous Buck 50 slashing, an attack where someone's face would get sliced so badly with a homemade weapon that it left scars needing 150 stitches. A lot of times the blade was carved out of something random, like a Scrabble game piece. This brutality made Mack and his crew feared across the island.
They call it a Buck 50. They would give him 150 stitches across their face.
He starts imploring his followers to take knives and shivs and sharp objects and slash adversaries across the face as kind of a calling card.
When he got out in June 1999, instead of fading away, he expanded. Mack transformed the UBN into a massive street gang empire with different sets, like 9 Trey Gangsters and S Money Murder. He recruited heavily from the streets, often pulling in kids as young as 16. Soon, the Bloods weren't just running Rikers. They had a strong grip in New York, Virginia, North Carolina, Baltimore, and New Jersey. But here's where his past came back to haunt him. Around 1998 to 1999, Mack admitted that he had lied about seeing Don Taylor commit the murder. That confession flipped everything. In 2004, Taylor's conviction was overturned, and he walked free after serving 17 long years for something he didn't do. He later sued the city of New York twice and walked away with millions. The irony in all this is how Mack, the founder of a gang built on no snitching, had originally built his freedom on snitching. The UBN itself took on a life of its own. Though inspired by West Coast Bloods, they quickly became their own distinct force. They had a structured hierarchy, secret codes, hand signs, tattoos, graffiti, and their own rituals. New recruits often had to survive a 31-second beat-in or commit a brutal slashing of an innocent bystander just to be accepted. Their graffiti carried hidden meanings too, like writing a lowercase c followed by a capital K to mark themselves as Crip killers.
If you're a member, you're going to be a member for life.
We had to reinforce blood culture in order to offset that aggressiveness by the Crips.
Federal operations like Op 9 Connect, Operation Heat, and Operation Tin Panda eventually targeted the gang's drug and criminal operations, exposing everything from bank fraud to ties with Italian mafia families. Female members known as Blood X were also involved, and some were even encouraged to raise blood drop kids, basically the next generation of gangsters from birth. But every empire has an end. On May 8, 2001, Port was arrested with 15 others. He was slapped with 83 counts ranging from racketeering, murder conspiracy, drug robbery, fraud, weapons charges, you name it, it was in there. In 2002, he was convicted on 10 counts, and by April 2003, he was sentenced to 50 years with no parole. He ended up in ADX Florence, the toughest prison in America, also known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. Today, he's still there. His old co-founder, Leonard Mackenzie, is also serving time, hit with 25 years to life back in 2000. The UBN, without Mack at the top, fractured and splintered into chaos. He was the enforcer who carried the UBN's reputation even further. Born in the Bronx in the late 1980s, Magoo grew up in the streets, running with a deadly crew called the Trigger Finger Posse. They were linked to drugs and at least 7 murders. By the time he was 17, he was already facing armed robbery charges and found himself at Rikers Island. At one point, Magoo was even a member of the Latin Kings, one of the most powerful Hispanic gangs. But after a fallout, he either left or got kicked out. While waiting for a murder trial, he went all in on violence inside Rikers. He slashed 4 inmates, got caught with 7 weapons, and ended up with a record-breaking 1,040 days in solitary confinement. This was when he started to align with the Bloods. Some say he built trust by pointing out rival Latino gang members and setting them up for attacks. By March 1994, Magoo became one of the first Latino members of the Bloods in New York. 2 years later, he was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 26 years to life. Prison didn't stop him, though. By 2003, Magoo was sitting at the very top of the 9-tray Gangsters, holding the title of Godfather and even chairman of the entire United Blood Nation Council.
According to prosecutors, for years, Pedro Gutierrez worked as the chairman of the infamous 15,000-member gang United Blood Nation from his prison cell in New York.
His most infamous move came in 2011 when he sparked a violent gang war in North Carolina, all from inside his cell. He ordered his people to attack a rival breakaway crew, the Pretty Tony faction. The result was chaos in the prisons. 5 different North Carolina prisons went into lockdown for 6 months straight. The feds came down heavy on him in 2017, indicting him as part of a massive 83-person sweep. His 2018 trial in Charlotte was so dangerous that the jury was kept anonymous. Prosecutors pointed out that the UBN had a history of witness intimidation, kidnappings, and even murder-for-hire plots against prosecutors. They weren't taking any chances. On September 4, 2018, Magoo was sentenced to an extra 20 years on top of his life sentence. Like OG Mack, he's now at ADX Florence in Colorado. His release date is not until 2036. This guy was one of the most feared leaders of the Aryan Brotherhood, AB, the most notorious white prison gang in America. Born in 1947, Bingham was a massive guy. Earning his nickname because of his size and strength, he got into trouble young. At 19, he was busted for petty theft, then moved on to armed robbery. Violence was his calling card. Other inmates described him as the most violent person they'd ever met. That kind of reputation made him rise quickly inside the AB, where he became one of the 3 men who controlled the gang's national operations alongside Barry the Baron Mills. Here's the craziest part. Bingham had a Star of David tattoo on one arm and a swastika on the other, a bizarre, almost trolling contradiction. But his most infamous act came in August 1997. From inside ADX Florence, he launched a full-blown race war. He smuggled out orders written in invisible ink made from urine and citrus juice. Guards missed them completely. When the papers were heated, the message appeared: War with DC Blacks, TD. In other words, kill every black inmate you see.
They're what I like to call the mission statements of the Aryan Brotherhood, documents that detail how the Aryan Brotherhood will operate. The defendants had worked out a code for murder, baby boy versus baby girl. If it was going to be a baby boy, meant that it was going to be war with the DC Blacks.
The next day, AB members at Lewisburg Penitentiary went on a stabbing spree. 2 black inmates were murdered in cold blood. The government realized just how dangerous Bingham was. Even locked up 1,700 miles away, he could still command death with a piece of paper. His crew used elaborate codes and even old ciphers dating back centuries, hiding messages inside books and letters. At one point, their codes were found hidden inside a Napoleon biography. The feds launched one of the largest RICO cases in history in 2002, charging 29 AB members with decades of murder and conspiracy. In 2006, Bingham and Mills went to trial. The government pushed for the death penalty, but the jury deadlocked.
What deterrent is a life sentence? Absolutely nothing. They're already doing life. Prison is their home. This is the environment they thrive in. So it's not a punishment.
Needed the death penalty to send a message to the others. We take the murder of other inmates and staff and civilians serious.
As a result of the two.
Instead, Bingham got 3 consecutive life sentences. Today, he's still at ADX Florence. Mills died in 2018, but the Hulk is still alive. Better known as Sitawa Nantambu Jamar, was a high-ranking member of the Black Guerrilla family, BGF, who shifted his focus from violence to activism. Jamar's journey started with a murder case in 1980 in Alameda County, California, which got him 25 years to life. As part of the BGF, a gang with roots in both street crime and revolutionary politics, Jamar was known for his influence inside prison. By the early 2000s, he was locked in Pelican Bay State Prison's notorious Secure Housing Unit, SHU, where inmates spent 22.5 hours a day in total isolation.
My name is Marie Levin. My brother has been locked in solitary confinement for 29 plus years. I was able to touch my brother was in 1982.
But Jamar didn't just sit in solitary, he organized. In 2011, he and other top gang members from rival factions formed the Short Corridor Collective. From their cells, they spread the word and coordinated hunger strikes to protest California's use of indefinite solitary confinement. At its peak in 2013, over 33,000 inmates across the state joined in, the largest prison hunger strike in U.S. history.
Between 50 and 100 prisoners have announced plans to begin a hunger strike. 6,600 prisoners in 13 state prisons refuse meals.
Thousands of inmates have been on hunger strike for almost 2 weeks.
Jamar became a named plaintiff in Oscar vs. Governor, a lawsuit that changed the system. In 2015, California agreed to end indefinite SHU terms and limit solitary confinement to 5 years unless serious infractions were committed. After over 40 years inside, Jamar's health began failing. In 2020, he was granted medical parole and moved to the California Healthcare Facility in Stockton, where he's serving out his days. Also known as Eskimo, his name carried a different kind of fear. Born April 27, 1973, McGee grew up right in the middle of that East LA gang culture. His father, a Scottish guy, dipped out on the family, leaving him clinging harder to his Mexican-American roots and diving headfirst into the streets. By his teenage years, he wasn't just part of Toonerville Reefa, 13, TVR 13. He was making a name for himself as someone you didn't cross. Violence was his calling card, and strategy made him dangerous. By the late 90s, Eskimo was a shot caller, orchestrating power plays and murders that gave him a reputation as one of the most ruthless in LA. The list of what McGee did is straight out of a horror script. In 1997, he lit up Ronnie Martin, 28 shots, execution style, no hesitation. 3 years later, in June 2000, he killed 16-year-old Ryan Gonzalez over something petty because they shared the same street nickname, Hueto or Huero. McGee thought there could only be one, so Gonzalez had to go, cold and senseless. Later that same year, he set up an ambush on LAPD officers, luring them into Tunerville turf before gunmen opened fire on their patrol car. But the darkest stain on his name came on August 8, 2001, the Wysotsky family massacre. McGee allegedly stormed into Cherry Wysotsky's home because she snitched on his drug activity. Sherry, her mother, and even a neighbor were slaughtered. They weren't players in the game, they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. That's what made him terrifying. His violence wasn't just targeted, it spilled over to the innocent. Police later found notebooks where McGee bragged in his own hand, writing gangster rap lyrics about his murders, openly mocking witness protection, promising rats wouldn't make it to the stand.
Of killing 2 gang rivals and a woman. One of the victims was shot 28 times. McGee also opened fire on police officers during an ambush. The prosecutors say he even boasted in rap lyrics about the pleasure he got from killing.
After years of terror, the law finally caught up. In 2003, after a massive manhunt, McGee was arrested in Arizona. In 2005, while awaiting trial, he sparked a full-blown riot inside LA County Jail, where inmates attacked guards and set fires. That alone earned him 75 years to life. Then in 2009, he was convicted on multiple counts of manslaughter and attempted manslaughter, sentenced to death.
You are sentenced to death.
35-year-old Timothy McGee seemed smiling and laughing during the sentencing hearing.
He sat on death row at San Quentin, but in 2023, his death sentence was overturned on appeal. Still, Eskimo isn't going anywhere. He's locked in for life. His reign of terror just a scar on LA's history now. This guy who wore his hate on his skin and in his actions. Born March 1st, 1975, Lindberg came up violent from the jump. Even as a teen, he was already committing assaults and robberies. One of his most twisted early acts was attacking an 11-year-old boy with a BB gun just because the kid's dad was a cop. By the time he hit prison, Lindberg was knee-deep in white supremacist ideology. He wasn't just another skinhead, he claimed ties to the White Aryan Resistance, WAR, one of the most notorious hate groups in the country, and in 1996, he went from being a loudmouth racist to a murderer whose crime would make California history. On January 28, 1996, he and an accomplice hunted down 24-year-old Tien Minh Lai, a Vietnamese-American honor student. Lai was just playing tennis at a high school court in Tustin, California, living his life. Lindberg didn't see a person. He saw an opportunity to make his hate real. He and his accomplice beat Lai, stabbed him over 50 times, and slashed his throat. It was a racially motivated execution, pure and simple. The evidence that nailed Lindberg was his own words. He wrote a letter to his cousin, bragging, almost gleefully, about killing a Jap. He broke it down like it was nothing, saying he tricked Lai, stabbed him, and slit his throat. That letter, read in court, chilled the room. Even the prosecutors and the judge, who see evil daily, said the cruelty stood out, calling Lindberg a monster without compassion. In 1997, Lindberg was convicted of first-degree murder. What set his case apart was the sentence. He became the first man in California to be sentenced to death for a racially motivated hate crime. The California Supreme Court upheld it in 2008, cementing his place as a cautionary tale of hate taken to its deadliest form. Even on death row at San Quentin, Lindberg stayed on brand, still spewing white supremacist garbage, still posing as a reformed man on prison pen pal sites while secretly keeping ties to skinhead groups. He remains on death row to this day, his life a wasted story of pure hatred. He came up in West Springfield, Massachusetts, a blue-collar guy who became a trusted hitman and enforcer for the Genovese crime family. By the early 2000s, his name carried weight in mob circles, known for being loyal to the code and deadly efficient at his work. In 2003, he helped orchestrate the hit on Springfield mob boss Big Al Bruno. He also played a role in the disappearance of Gary Westerman, a low-level associate who got lured to a fake job, struck in the head, buried, and forgotten. But his claim to infamy came in 2018 inside USP Hazleton. James Whitey Bulger, the Boston Irish mob boss turned FBI informant, had just been transferred there. Bulger was old, frail, in a wheelchair, but to Freddy Geas, none of that mattered. Bulger was a rat, and Geas hated snitches with a passion. Within 12 hours of Bulger's arrival, he was beaten to death. The attack was savage. Bulger was struck in the head repeatedly with a padlock and a sock, beaten so badly he was nearly unrecognizable.
Authorities now believe Bulger was beaten repeatedly with a lock and a sock, the brutal attack taking place inside the 89-year-old's cell, just hours after he arrived at this West Virginia prison.
Investigators later said Geas didn't deny involvement, but he didn't confirm it either. He just kept quiet. The ultimate nod to the mob code. Already serving life for Bruno and Westerman's murders, Geas was hit with additional charges in 2022 for Bulger's killing. In 2024, he pled guilty to a lesser manslaughter charge, adding 25 years to his sentence. Today, he's still locked up in ADX Florence, the supermax that holds America's worst. A man who transformed a Chicago gang into something that looked more like a militant nation-state than a crew. Born February 20th, 1947, Fort grew up in Chicago, and by his teens was already deep into the gang game. But Fort had charisma, vision, and ambition that went beyond corner hustling. By the mid-1960s, he was steering the Black Pea Stones into a disciplined, centralized force. Later, after converting to Islam, he rebranded the gang into El Rukn, meaning the cornerstone in Arabic. Fort wasn't content with street-level hustling. He had a throne in his headquarters, posters of himself and Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi hanging behind him. In the mid-1980s, while locked up, Fort allegedly started plotting with the Libyan regime to carry out acts of terrorism on U.S. soil. They talked about bombing federal buildings, assassinating politicians, even shooting down airplanes, all for $2.5 million in funding. He used code words like apples and potatoes when talking explosives. The feds had wiretaps, recordings, even videotapes of Fort pledging allegiance to Gaddafi.
I went back to the beginning and started listening to the conversations again, and I started piecing the bits and pieces of the conversation together, that they were talking about having met with someone in Libya who was going to provide them with money for destroying an airplane here in the United States.
El Rukn wasn't just a gang anymore. It was a paramilitary group with an arsenal that included an anti-tank rocket launcher. Fort's vision blurred the line between street crime and global terrorism. It was the first time U.S. citizens were ever convicted of conspiring with a foreign government to commit terrorism. By 1987, the feds had enough. Fort was convicted of narcotics, racketeering, and terrorism charges. He caught an additional 80 years for the Libya plot alone. Today, Jeff Fort is still alive, still locked up, serving time at ADX Florence, a man who literally built an empire from inside a prison cell. Locked up since 1973 for murder, but for decades, still running a criminal machine that stretched across states and pulled in an estimated $100 million a year. Born on November 30th, 1950 in Jackson, Mississippi, Hoover's early life was shaped by the hard realities of Chicago's West Side after his family moved north. By just 13 years old, he had already jumped into gang life, joining the Supreme Gangsters. He wasn't just another kid looking for protection. Hoover stood out. He had vision. He had strategy. He thought like a general. And in 1969, he proved it. Hoover orchestrated the merger of his gang with the Black Disciples, creating a new powerhouse, the Gangster Disciples, GD. From that moment, he positioned himself as more than just a gang leader. He was a king presiding over a street kingdom.
His name is Larry Hoover. He's the reputed leader of the Black Gangster Disciples street gang, one of the largest in the nation.
But his brand of leadership mixed charisma with cruelty. In 1973, when 19-year-old William Pookie Young was suspected of stealing from the gang, Hoover didn't hesitate. He ordered Young's abduction and murder, a brutal message carved into the streets of Chicago. Young was beaten and shot, his body dumped in an alley. On March 16th of that same year, Hoover was arrested, convicted, and handed down a massive sentence of 150 to 200 years. Most people would have disappeared into obscurity after that. Not Hoover. From behind bars, he grew stronger. Prison walls became his boardroom. The Gangster Disciples evolved into a multi-state corporation involved in drugs, extortion, and political influence. By the early 90s, the GD were making about $100 million annually and had spread into at least 24 states. Hoover operated with a level of sophistication that left law enforcement scrambling. He used coded messages, smuggled kites, and even set up dual chains of command. One inside prison, one outside. His system was run like a Fortune 500 company, except the business was crime. He wasn't just running drugs either. Hoover pushed his influence into politics, community organizations, and even voter outreach. He backed a group called 21st Century 5 OTE, using it as a political arm to sway elections in Chicago. Federal agents eventually realized they were dealing with something way bigger than just a prison gang leader. So they launched Operation Headache, a 6-year undercover sting that used hidden microphones, wiretaps, and informants. The feds caught Hoover in his own words. They bugged a visitor's badge with a tiny radio transmitter, capturing hours of conversations where Hoover openly bragged about his power. He spoke of corrupting officials, arranging drug deals, and even convincing prison workers to make keys for potential escapes. Those tapes became the hammer that brought him down. In 1995, Hoover and his inner circle were indicted on federal charges. At trial, prosecutors painted him as a ruthless CEO of crime. On August 22, 1997, he was convicted of drug conspiracy, extortion, and continuing to engage in a criminal enterprise. Another life sentence stacked onto his original time. And this time, he was sent to ADX Florence, Colorado, the infamous Supermax prison, the Alcatraz of the Rockies.
Anytime you do a extensive amount of time, it can have two effects. It can harden you, or it can make you think. And I've thought.
Yet, even there, Hoover's name didn't fade. Authorities have claimed his influence still trickles down to the streets. In 2015, a gangster disciple tried to send him a message offering to handle business for him. And in 2021, Kanye West and Drake headlined a massive benefit concert in Los Angeles, raising awareness about sentencing reform and calling for Hoover's release. Known as a hardened shot caller in the Mexican mafia, La EME, Castellanos orchestrated bloodshed from behind the isolation of a Supermax cell. Castellanos grew up in Los Angeles, deeply rooted in the street culture that fed into the EME. In 1979, he caught a murder charge in LA County and was sentenced to 26 years to life. But instead of fading away, prison sharpened him. Inside, he built a rep as violent, disciplined, and absolutely loyal to La EME's rules. His record was full of stabbings and drug busts, but he kept climbing the ranks. By 1990, he was considered so dangerous that he was transferred to Pelican Bay State Prison's Security Housing Unit, one of the most extreme isolation facilities in the country. Most people in the SHU lose touch with the outside world. Not Castellanos. Even locked in a windowless cell, he found ways to send orders. Tiny handwritten notes called kites, smuggled messages, and loyal foot soldiers carried his word.
Joe?
Well, Paul, they have 300 to 400 members in prison, and you double that on the outside. They have a long, violent, bloody history, and the fact that people are starting to turn up dead suddenly could serve as a wake-up call that the Mexican Mafia, or La MM, is no myth.
And in 2004, his word sparked a nightmare. Castellanos issued a green light against African-American gangs, specifically targeting the East Coast Crips in Florencia, 13's neighborhood of South LA. But this wasn't just a call to fight rivals, it became a racially charged war. F-13 members were ordered that if they couldn't find specific targets, they should simply shoot any black person they saw. That command turned the streets into killing fields. Over the next 18 months, more than 80 shootings and 20 murders unfolded, many of them innocent victims caught in a race war sparked from one man's prison orders. Law enforcement couldn't believe it. A gang boss in near-total isolation had managed to orchestrate a citywide bloodbath. In 2007, federal indictments exposed the truth. Castellanos was pulling strings from his cell, proving just how absolute La EMA's control was over Southern California gangs. Beyond the killings, Castellanos also played a role in organizing massive prisoner hunger strikes in 2013. By 2006, Castellanos was moved to an even more isolated section of Pelican Bay, reserved for the highest level threats. Today, he's still there, locked in solitary. Few crimes in Los Angeles gang history shook the city like the Alexander family massacre, and at the center of it was Taquan Andre Cox, better known as Lil Fee. Born December 1st, 1965, Cox was a product of South Central LA's streets, where the Rollin 60s Crips were rising as one of the most organized and feared sets. By just 18 years old, Cox had stamped his name into infamy. On August 31st, 1984, he and accomplices carried out a home invasion that became one of LA's most heartbreaking tragedies. Their target was supposed to be a family tied to a gang-related lawsuit. Instead, they hit the wrong house. Cox and his crew stormed the home of Ibora Alexander, the mother of NFL player Kermit Alexander. Inside, Cox shot Ibora as she sipped coffee, then gunned down her daughter Deetra and two young grandsons, Damon, 8, and Damani, 13, as they slept.
Looking at her, 3 shots are fired, literally blowing her skull off. Then they went to the front room where his sister, Deetra, who was 24 and about to get married, and 2 of his nephews, Damon and Damani, were asleep. And Deetra was shot 3 times, and each of the boys in their sleep shot through the head.
The community was horrified. The judge at trial called Cox a menace without moral fiber. Kermit Alexander, whose family had been shattered, has spoken for decades about the devastation, attending every one of Cox's hearings to ensure his loved ones weren't forgotten. But Cox's violence didn't stop there. In 1988, while on death row at San Quentin, he nearly killed Crips co-founder Stanley Tookie Williams in a prison stabbing. Then, in 2000, Cox led one of the boldest escape attempts in San Quentin's history. With 2 other inmates, he cut through a fence with smuggled tools and was just moments from climbing to freedom before armed guards stopped them. In 1986, Cox was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. He remains on death row at San Quentin, his name forever tied to one of LA's darkest crimes. Better known as Raw Diggs, he grew up in Brooklyn's Gowanus projects, surrounded by crime long before the area gentrified. By his teens, he was Bloods affiliated and later built his own crew, the murderous Mad Dogs. Violence followed him everywhere. In 2000, after getting shot over a drug debt, he organized a retaliation from his hospital bed that left his shooter dead. That kind of ruthless payback became his calling card. By 2001, he was charged with murder, but beat the case after witnesses backed out. Walking away only boosted his street legend. Over the next decade, Herron tightened his grip on the Gowanus projects, running drug spots, extorting rivals, and allegedly orchestrating multiple killings, including those of Richard Russo and Victor Zapata. At the same time, he was chasing rap stardom. He linked with Waka Flocka Flame and Uncle Murda, putting out tracks that blurred the line between music and confession. In Eulogy, he rapped about death, pain, and survival, lyrics prosecutors later used as evidence against him.
The music is basically us talking about the life that we come from, not necessarily saying this is what I did. You know, this is a very intelligent man, and this is not a man who would commit all these crimes and didn't tell you for you to use it against him.
They allege that Herron is guilty of racketeering charges for running a drug dealing operation in the Gowanus housing development where he grew up. They also claim he was involved in 3 murders.
In 2010, the feds swooped in. Herron was arrested outside a Manhattan club, and by 2012, he faced a massive RICO indictment with 23 counts. The trial painted him as both a rapper and a ruthless gang boss. Former associates testified, his own lyrics were played in court, and the image of Raw Diggs as an artist collapsed under the weight of Raw Diggs the criminal. On June 26, 2014, he was convicted of racketeering, 3 murders, and drug. Though the death penalty was dropped, the judge gave him 3 life sentences plus 105 years. Later, more time was stacked after Diggs mouthed off defiantly in court. Today, Herron sits in ADX Florence, the Supermax Alcatraz of the Rockies, alongside terrorists and cartel bosses. Supporters still claim he was overcharged, but appeals have failed.